with sovereignty and that so many centuries ago, you would have heard Nick the most convincing, the most compelling speech for staying in that I've ever heard. And I think if some of those Boston, Lincoln people were in that and saw that speech, we wouldn't be in the place we are today. But Nick, former Deputy Prime Minister, MP for Sheffield, I could go on for ages and ages, but I think we all know him. It's fantastic to have you here, Nick, and welcome, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Nigel, and it's lovely to see you, and particularly those of you who have joined the party anew. It really is fantastic that you've done so, and you're joining a party at a time of, well, I mean, I can't exaggerate the consequences of this momentous and, in my view, deeply tragic decision that the country took in the referendum. The shockwaves of which, the effects of which, will ripple for years and years and years, and will desperately require, urgently require, a strong internationalist, moderate, enlightened, compassionate, liberal voice in British politics. Just at the point of our sort of darkest hour, I mean, it was a body blow enough last year to have suffered that terrible election defeat, but then to also see so many of the internationalist values being shredded by the lies, the vitriol, the populism, the regressive vested interests in the press last Thursday, of course makes this a moment of the sort of dark soul for any liberal, but of course it makes liberalism all the more necessary. British liberalism is a long, venerable, wonderful tradition that has lit the way for reform, for emancipation, for progress, not just in our country but across the world for centuries. It will not and it must not die under the rubble of this spasm of grievance and anger and fear that led to the referendum result last Thursday. So joining the Liberal Democrats now is exactly the right time to do so, because if there's any party that is hardy and resilient enough to withstand all the shocks and setbacks, it's the Liberal Democrats, and we are needed now more than ever before. So particular thanks to those of you who are new members. Those of us who've been chatting earlier, I mean, the palpable sense of sorrow and shock and anger that I hear from all of you is one that I share, and I think it's really important that we hold on to that. I mean, anger can be a destructive emotion, but it's also an important and powerful one, and I'm profoundly angry at what has happened. I am deeply shocked at what has happened. Some of the shock is obvious. I'm shocked, even given everything I've witnessed through politics, by the brazen industrial scale lies which were peddled to millions of our fellow citizens. I'm shocked, but I probably shouldn't be shocked and surprised by the sheer vituperative aggression with which unaccountable interests in the press and elsewhere prosecuted their case. I'm shocked and appalled to see the way that, unaccountable hedge fund managers funded the Brexit campaign in pursuit of their sort of vision of turning Britain into some sort of freewheeling, low-regulation Dubai, catering for kind of hot money from corrupt, dubious regimes around the world. That shocked. But you know what's probably shocked me more than anything else? Is the sort of casualness, the sort of flippancy with which our wonderful country has been put into jeopardy by the kind of complacency and arrogance of people like David Cameron and George Osborne, who thought that they could put our country and the integrity of the United Kingdom on the line to basically settle an internal party dispute, and that somehow our country and the prospects of our children was somehow a price worth risking to settle that internal dispute. How dare they? How dare they even have thought it was right to put at risk my children's future and your children's future and future generations' prospects at risk like this to settle that dispute? That of all the things I'm shocked by, that's the one that still angers and shocks me the most. So I think it is important we hold onto that. But of course it mustn't just be impotent anger. We must do something about it. Go to the rally tomorrow. I think Tim Farron has been absolutely brilliant in the way that he's expressed the kind of dismay that so many people across the country feel. I think he's been brilliant in the way he's reached out to many new members who didn't agree with what happened on Thursday, and it's wonderful that he'll be there at that rally speaking on our behalf, so I hope we'll be able to go and support him. But beyond the rally, we need to think about what we can do next. Now, we're not, in my view, going to have a second referendum. We're not going to suddenly sort of overturn this because we don't like it, or we don't like the basis upon which that campaign was run. But that doesn't mean that there aren't certain things that we must, in my view, aggressively fight for as a party. Firstly, the Conservative Party has no right, in my view, to play pass the parcel with the occupant of number 10, as if somehow the rest of the country doesn't matter. They were elected last year on a meagre vote of 24% of eligible voters in this country, on a completely different basis than that which they now propose to continue to govern this country for the next 4 years. They have no right to somehow hoard the governance of our country to themselves without the say-so of the British people. It is ludicrous, the idea that 0.003% of the population, those who are members of the Conservative Party, are the only people who will be able to elect our next Prime Minister to govern us in a way which was completely different to that which they were expected to govern on when they were elected last year. For heaven's sake, the reason the Conservatives won the election last year was because, above and beyond everything else, people felt that the economy was safe with the Conservatives. Look what they've done. Look what they've done. They have done more damage to the British economy in the last few days that John McDonnell could manage in a decade. How dare they call themselves the party of business when they've done more to betray the needs and interests of British business than any British government in peacetime history. So I think it is essential that we as Liberal Democrats say to whichever of this shower who's now putting themselves forward as leader of the Conservative Party, that when they get elected, and their election is announced by Conservative members on September the 9th, they must come clean, firstly, with what plan? Do they have a plan? Do they have any idea what they want to do with our wonderful, great country now that they have cajoled and seduced and hoodwinked the country into marching towards Brexit? We need to hear what they mean by that. They have a mandate, perhaps through the referendum, to pull the United Kingdom out of the European Union. They have no mandate whatsoever on how to do that, because they didn't deign to tell us what they meant when they said Brexit. And it's not a technical matter, by the way, whether you're in a single market or not in a single market, whether you cooperate in this or the other. It touches on profound constitutional issues for the future. So they must come clean with what they mean by Brexit, and then they must submit that idea and themselves to the British people in an early general election. That's the first thing that we must fight for. We must fight for. And we as Liberal Democrats must not be fighting another election. I mean, candidly, I don't think it can go much worse than last year. So I kind of think the only way is up. The second thing is, I think we should start reasserting parliamentary rights and prerogatives in our representative democracy. Okay, we've had a referendum. We as a party have advocated a referendum, so we can't, we should not be so holier than thou about the fact that a referendum can happen. But here's the thing: the executive, the government of the day, for the reasons I explained earlier, in the absence of any meaningful or workable plan about how Brexit should operate, must be held to account by Parliament, so that Parliament can scrutinise and test and challenge the legality and workability of their plan to pull the United Kingdom out of the European. That is the constitutional duty of what a Parliament is there for, to hold what the executive is doing to account. Now, I, for instance, think there is a fundamental lie and contradiction at the heart of what the Conservatives are saying, that you can be part of a single market and not subject to the rules of the single market. It almost fascinates me in a sort of appalling way to see sentient, otherwise intelligent human beings sort of populate or pollute, whatever you want to call it, are the airwaves and the radio shows, and say to people earnestly, well, of course we want to have full access to the single market, but we're not going to be subject to the rules of the single market. That is what the single market is. It is a body of rules. They talk about trade as if it's as if we've reverted back to the days of 19th century gunboat diplomacy. And it's all about tariffs and taxes. It is the whole point about the single market, created extraordinarily enough by a conservative government, Margaret Thatcher's government, was its great insight was that if you really want to expand trade, most especially, by the way, for a country such as ours, which in effect imports goods and exports services, is you've got to have one set of rules, not 28 set of rules, governing how you export those goods and services across this great European continent of ours. So you cannot. It is impossible to be in the single market, to have full access in the single market and not be subject to the rules. That is the lie, that is the conceit which they have sold to the British people. There's another less technical way of putting it. They have persuaded people that we can have our cake and eat it. Guess what? In the European Union, just as much in every other walk of life, as I remind my 3 little sons as they try and have their cake and eat it, in every possible variant in their everyday life, you can't. So they have to come clean with that, A, in an election, and B, we then need to hold them to account, I think, in the House of Commons, by insisting that they come to the House of Commons with their plans for Brexit. I don't think they should be triggering this so-called Article 50 process without the consent of our Parliament. I don't think they should be concluding it without the consent of Parliament as well, so that there are at least moments where we can pause and Parliament can pause and we can force the government to pause, having embarked on this disastrous journey, so that we can stop and pause and say, is this really what you meant? Is this really what you wanted? Is this really what you expected? Because I can tell you there are going to be some really nasty surprises in the next few years. I was saying to someone earlier, I was just talking to a very old friend of mine, Cecilia Malmström, who is the European Commissioner for Trade, on the phone just about half an hour ago, and she's about as pro-British Anglophile an individual as you might ever care to admit to meet. And she said, you cannot exaggerate how both hurt and angry people feel on the other side of the channel. Because let's remember, when David Cameron flippantly held this referendum and then lost it, in part, by the way, because of the disastrous way that he and George Osborne conducted that sort of campaign, that sort of listless, bloodless, uninspiring way that they did, threatening people with sort of punishment beatings and budgets if we didn't vote the way that they wanted. She said, they've now pulled the plug on Britain's membership of the European Union, and guess who's suffering more than anybody else? It's the markets elsewhere in Europe. So these countries are seeing their own economies badly damaged by a process and a decision over which they've got no control whatsoever. If I was a German leader, or a Portuguese leader, or a Spanish leader, I would do what is my democratic duty. I want to protect my country, the people I represent, by cutting my losses and getting this over and done with as soon as possible. I would do it with regret, but I try and do it as quickly as possible. So of course there's a certain ruthlessness that is entering into the language of those other European leaders. They can't be expected to have Britain stick 2 fingers up to them and then also provide them with a sweetheart deal with kid gloves. Of course not. Of course not. And I think as that reality sinks in, a lot of people think, oh, heavens above, is that what we meant? Is that what we really wanted to do? Is that the impact that we expected it would have on our kids and on our community, and on the economic well-being of ourselves? And for that reason, on top of so many others, I think, in addition to insisting on an early election, in addition to going to the rally tomorrow and supporting Tim, we also need to insist in a representative democracy that Parliament holds these muppets to account as they try and fight their way out of the cul-de-sac in which they have located themselves, with such disastrous consequences for this wonderful country that we all rightly love. thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we know you've got to go, but one more thing you can do for us is have a photo with us. And I think we're exactly right here.